Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think that counts as the mic is on. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Welcome everyone to this talk. So usually when we're at David Brown's, you'll be thinking about scones and afternoon teas, and apparently I got tricked into working for my free lunch. So I suppose nothing is really free after all. So for this morning, the title of our discussion is Echoes Through Time, all right? And of course, at first, when I was given the title to chair this panel, I thought perhaps Penang Hill, they were thinking about ghost stories or something because it's echoes, right? But apparently not. But anyhow, history and hauntings both can give us goosebumps. And oh, okay, I see Dato' 𝐿𝐸𝐿 here. Thank you very much, Dato' 𝐿𝐸𝐿, for inviting all of us here this morning for this talk. My name is Dr. Bam Mei Ting. I'm the head of the History and Regional Studies program at Penang Institute. And of course, it's a pleasure to have all of you here with us this morning. And in all of my years moderating for Penang Hill Festival, this would be my very first time moderating my boss. So I don't know how Dato' 𝐿𝐸𝐿 expects me to stop him when it's his time, because my paycheck depends on him actually. Yeah, okay. So all right, so let's move on to the real reason that we're here, which is, of course, to hear from our speakers. And this is how it will work, all right? Each of our speakers will be speaking for 25 to 30 minutes each on their own presentations. And then after that, it'll be open to Q&A. And at that point, you can ask any of your questions and engage with our speakers. It's on. So to open today's discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, 𝐿𝐸𝐿𝐸. Now, Eugene is an author, independent researcher, and explorer whose work vividly brings to life the layered history of the Straits of Malacca and Penang in particular. His forthcoming book, tentatively titled An Illustrated Guide to the North Coast of Penang, promises to be a rich addition to our understanding of the island. A regular contributor to Penang Monthly and Penang City Eye, Eugene has earned a reputation for uncovering compelling, often overlooked stories that illuminate the connections between Penang's past and present. Now, through meticulous archival research, he crafts narrative nonfiction that is both accessible and deeply informed, bridging the world of academic scholarship with the everyday curiosity of the general reader. Of course, beyond the written word, Eugene is a sought-after heritage interpreter who leads educational walks for the Penang Heritage Trust and Persatuan Pencinta Sejarah dan Warisan Pulau Pinang, which is also known as Penang Hidden Gems, and is the co-host of the People of Penang podcast, or Popcast. He's also a member of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. So this morning, Eugene will take us on a journey into Penang Hill's earliest chapters, setting the stage today for the discoveries we'll be exploring together. Please join me in welcoming 𝐿𝐸𝐿𝐸.
So we're going to see a lot of, okay, this is a famous one, but there are many that have never been seen before, and I would like to share. All because of one thing that got me into trouble. Is because, just like, Alice in Wonderland, I fell into a rabbit hole. Because while writing the book, it always bugs me. Why Batu Feringhi? Who are these Feringhi? So once you dig in, you actually meet them. They are the Portuguese, the Feringhi. In Malacca, you have that Kubal Feringhi. They're actually a Persian term, Farangi, meaning the Franks from the Persian traders. So that got me in the very deep rabbit hole. And indirectly, you can't avoid touching the hills of Penang. And there's no Penang Hill, by the way. We're not on Penang Hill. We're on Flagstaff Hill, Government Hill, but it's a mountain range. Penang itself is a big hill. So that's how the mariners saw it. So today I'm going to share with you how mariners throughout the history, as far as the recorded history we have, seen Penang. And of course, when you see Penang, you can't avoid the hills. They drew it, they talk about it, and most of it is unknown because Malaysian history tends to be based on British sources. So due to my accidental, forays into all this, the French, the Portuguese, and the Dutch, I would like to share with you some of the material for the first time. Views of Penang, especially the hill, before the 19th century, which we often associate with the period where the East India Company presidency. Okay, so let's fall back in time. Where is our first stop? What year are we going? The very first hand account, not on the minutes. 1795. Somewhere in town, there was a place called Ossian Hall, and it belonged to the Scott family. James Scott, his cousin, Walter. And they are relatives of the novelist, the famous novelist. William Scott. They are all cousins of the famous novelist Walter Scott. So he went up the hill this hill, right here, in 1795, and he wrote about it. This was transcribed by Marcus Langdon and published in the Royal Aesthetic Society. It is the earliest first-hand account from his diary, okay, the journal of William Scott. At the beginning of the French War, the late Governor Light cleared the top of this hill, so the Napoleonic Wars, 1793, in order that the signals may be made for all ships in sight of the island, to give warning in case of an enemy appearing. And old invalid Sergeant Tucker and H. Francis, a gunner, with some Kaffirs, this could be the Kaffirs, the slaves, are stationed here to look out, to make signals under inspection. And, okay, I fell in too fast. Okay. And a small garden that has been, which they have peach, apple trees, paddy, potatoes, etc., which seem in thriving state. Water is got in the gully at a little distance, preferable to any at the point. So around the vicinity here, in 1795, there were apple trees and peaches. Okay, so this is unique in the sense that William Scott never wanted anybody to read his private journals. There are more scandalous items in there, but it's an eyewitness account of what it was like around here, this area, in 1795. Okay, so they went to great lengths to bring fruits from the temperate countries. Okay, so prior to that, it was just an outpost with a flagstaff. Okay, so it was only later during the Napoleonic Wars that it started to develop more into what we see today. First, as a more developed outpost. So, William Scott said that Mr. Light also built a bungalow for use of the gentlemen of the settlement, going on parties of pleasure, like himself, okay, for the good of, for the good health and the climate being cool and pleasant. But the access being difficult and at a distance of 8 or 10 miles, the procuring of eatables from the point is expensive and troublesome, upon which account few stay more than 8 or 10 days. I guess if you actually stay, you get to enjoy apples and peaches. Okay, so he actually hiked through Bukit Cendana from his diary, as we can deduce. It's quite a roundabout way. The actual path is not the one in the botanical gardens, which at that time was jungle. Later on, it became a quarry before it became the current botanical gardens. It actually started at the foothills near where the 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚 area. So he hiked all the way across Bukit Penara, which is the hill you see behind the turf club, and then all through to Aitam, and then up this jagged path, okay, to the Flagstaff. At that time, there were atap houses, okay, and later on the corridor linked and it became a full architectural feature. Okay, this is later in the 19th century. We don't have a drawing of it from the 18th century. Now, when is our next stop in time in our rabbit hole? What year are we going back into? You probably say, oh, that famous year, 1786, the British again. But no. So in a PhD talk last year, I showed the research from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the French National Library, where it was discovered in the papers of Antoine Bruni, Danton Chateau, okay, who later became admiral, that they were on a mission in that same year to survey all the British outposts and doings, trading in the Far East, to do a survey. And they passed by, they left Pondicherry on late in the season in October. And because it was late in the season, travel was really slow. If you follow the monsoon, it takes about 10 days to go across the Bay of Bengal, which what makes Penang great, because it's at the big opening of the Straits of Malacca. But it took them much longer. They arrived probably a month later. And surprisingly, it's not the British that first mapped their own settlement, it was the French. Because the first map by commission was in 1787. Okay, it's reproduced in Marcus Langdon's book, The Penang Presidency. But this map was only, I think, maybe 4 years ago, was finally made available in the National Library of France. And it shows the anchorage. But we are interested in hills. So notice this hill. It will appear many, many times, this double hill. And you would think that it's just a scribbling. No, because the French navigators, okay, who came to check out what the British were up to, use it as a landmark because it has been in navigation book for centuries. These two hills is actually Bukit Batu Mau area and Batu Hitam. So these are the two hills. If you sail in, okay, down the coast along the Straits of Malacca, okay, you will see this as the landmark. Pulau Pinang is a landmark, and these two hills, they call it the two round hovels, the Dutch. So, yep, so the French beat the British to mapping their own settlement. As you can see here, there are two rows of houses, some paddy, and a few buildings here. There's a more detailed one I showed. Currently, I think my friend, the map expert, Julian, he says if he ever goes to Paris, he's going to look for the missing legend because it says that there's actually another one showing what all the other buildings are, but it's missing from the file. Okay, so hopefully we can find that too one day, and we'll share it. And so this view is actually from Kedah in Pulau Saya, which like many places in Penang is named after an island, not an island itself. So on the Kampung Pulau Saya, which means overturned coconut shell in Minangkabau, if you look back, you got the most spectacular view of the North Coast. Obviously, because I write a book about the North Coast, I try to find the best. What do you think of this as the cover? So this is the entire North Coast of Penang. You can see Com Tower there. Yes. Where's the laser pointer actually? Yeah. The Tanjung. So actually, another thing you can think about is, people say this is called Tanjung Penaga. Indeed, it is. But think about it. Actually, from Kedah, the whole place looks like a Tanjung. It looks like it's actually connected, which is exactly how Jerai looks like on the other side when we look back. It's like a very long peninsula, but it's actually not. It's a very big bay. Okay, so what is our next stop? Okay, most people are like, wait, it's 1786. There's no history before that. You'll be wrong. 1784. And then we meet the British. Okay? Thomas Forrest was a we call adventurer. The word adventurer meant a little bit different in those times. It's more related to the word advance. Yeah, I give you an advance of money. In this case, they give people the advance of their lives, the danger, capital, of course, the East India Company and the stocks. Adventurers were, in the sense, people who were taking risks. They are entrepreneurs. So back then, to make your riches, you sail the ship, you get all the rare cargo, you get it back. If you're alive, well done. You advance your life and the payback is great. But if not, you lose it. So basically startups. So anyway, so this Thomas Forrest was sailing around these regions, and he wrote to Warren Hastings, the governor of Bengal. The timing wasn't very good. He also did one of the earliest maps of Pankor, surveyed the Dutch, went around all the way to Mergui and all that, and he actually sent a report about possible locations, and one of them was Pulau Pinang. Now, before he came here, right before he came here, he was at Phuket. Okay, he was hanging out with two other adventurers, James Scott and Francis Light. In fact, he went around riding in Phuket with Francis Light on an elephant. So we're having joyrides back then, Back then, you go to the rich guy, they take you around in a sports car, right? So back then, they'll take you around in the elephant. So right after that, he went, and together we know he had an intelligent Malay pilot because he wrote that in the report. So a pilot, we usually think today as somebody who flies a plane, but in fact, most of the aeronautical, even the word aeronautical, it comes from marine nautical. So all the terms like pilots and all that comes from the age of sail. So a pilot is someone who literally guides the ship, because every time you reach a new port, okay, you put the signal up, they'll come with their boats. Even today, by the way, if you look carefully, the merchant marines in Penang, they are still a pilotage company. They will go onto the boat, steer the ships and help them, even in the age of GPS, because they're still, all the local knowledge, and then get off the ship. Those are the pilots. Okay, so he had a Malay pilot, and he sailed around, and he surveyed Penang, and wrote a detailed report. In one of the detailed report, he actually mentioned for the first time, in some detail, the Great Hill. Okay, and if you look here, he says that this guy is orang kaya, the Acehnese, who he became friends with. He took, I believe, Vidaldi's music and then adapted it to Malay lyrics, which made the Sultan of Aceh very happy. So he became the orang kaya, a title of the Aceh nobility title. And he was very proud of it, so he's hanging all this there. Okay, so in his report to Warren Hastings, unfortunately, when it didn't really arrive, he got stuck in the India office. This is where it was found. So there was supposed to be a dispatch to London, but there was never really reached there. I found this in the India archives, the report that never quite reached Warren Hastings. Okay, Warren Hastings is a very big name in the East India Company, and he got impeached, but he was later acquitted. So timing was bad. Light also tried to suggest to Warren Hastings Phuket and Pulau Pinang as a potential port. So in his report, this is very interesting. This proves it had been inhabited, perhaps better than at present. Besides tin, they the Malays, gather much damir, okay, which is a kind of sap, rattans, and etc. Okay, right before this paragraph, he was talking about the different place names around Penang. Remember, this is 1784. So what he was told that at one time it was more populated. So between the hills on the island, which are of gentle ascent, there are many plains, padangs. This is not what I added. He actually wrote there, padangs. Okay, and it is so cool up there on them, as I am told, that I am persuaded wheat would grow there, the highest maybe 1,500 feet higher than the sea. Now, you be thinking, wow, there's one line mentioned, but it gets interesting because you see here, I am told. Who told him? Was his Malay pilot? Did the Malay pilot go up there and feel that it was cold? But he wouldn't know much about wheat because wheat doesn't really grow here. But we know that just before this, he was with James Scott. So perhaps, I'm not saying it is because we don't have evidence, but there's circumstantial evidence that perhaps one of those people he met at Phuket may have suggested this, that it was so cool up there that persuaded, wheat may grow at the highest. Interestingly, the first map later published by Alexander Dalrymple in 1786 was by James Scott. So we never know for sure, but this is a glimpse that he was interested to go up there. Actually, later in the report, he said that only if he had more time, he would go up there. So missed opportunity. He did, in fact, sketch the second oldest known sketch of Penang, but that doesn't have a hill, so I not included it, of Jereja at the south, which I showed in a different talk. 1772, we meet the British again. In fact, it was quite common for them to do the China trade, they call it. They'll set up in January, and they'll reach sometime in October in China. They'll get, what else? China porcelain. That's where the term comes from. Very Chinese porcelain is very good. And silk, okay? And of course, tea. Can't be British without tea. So it was very perilous. So sometime, one of the crew members of this East India man, that's what they called the country ships, died. So they had to do a burial at sea. And they were near this island called Pulau Penang. So we have the ship's log from the Admiralty. And if you read the ship's log, it's a very dangerous, tedious journey. It takes almost a year, just one trip. So basically, you'll be gone for like 2 years if you want to round trip, okay, just to get tea, but guaranteed wealth. So people are willing to die for it. So this poor chap died, and they buried him at sea. But well, at least he had a good view. Okay. So right after that, you see, even all the calamities, it was a chance to record things. And we have these paintings now, not because they love art, because they did not have photographs, and maritime landmarks are the keys to wealth. So even after the funeral, the captain found time, Richard Pierce, or noon, very specific, 19 August 1772. This is what feels like the most accurately dated early view of Penang. Okay, so yeah, that's this is. So as you can see, this is how it looks like, more towards the evening from that same vantage point in Kedah, and approximately where the ship, the Ashburnham, would have been. Okay, so now, how far back can we go further in the rabbit hole? Can we get past the 18th century? We're not quite yet. So, next one, 1768. Okay, now we tend to think that today we have our GPS, you know, and all of our technology and all that, and our sciences. I think we generally use technology, but back then technology was and sciences were being created. You have the Science Academy, and one of the things that were very important to all the great powers were navigation accuracy, charts, because it's the road to wealth. You get accurate maps, you get to the riches. So one way is that, you know, you need to track the objects in the skies, the sun, the stars, and all that for navigation. If you can know exactly their movements, which Kepler tried to figure out, then you can actually do very accurate charts. So, but then there was a problem. They didn't really know how far the sun away, how far away was the sun. So, because we lack of time, I'm going to show you a very interesting experiment. You put your finger here. Close one eye. Did I jump or did your finger jump? That's called the parallax effect. So, how you figure out things millions of kilometers away is that you observe it from 2 vantage points, and then using trigonometry, yes, that just trigonometry, you can figure out how far away. So it makes it more interesting when you have another object in front of another object. So the transit of Venus was a great event. In fact, James Cook was very famous for watching it in Tahiti, the transit of Venus. What's the big deal about Venus crossing the sun? Well, you have 2 celestial objects, and if you observe it from different locations, you get a very accurate distance of Venus and the sun, and then you can, you know, figure out whether Kepler was right. And if he was right, you can actually predict the movements of the planets. That's superpower of prediction. So this astronomer, Le Gentil, was French. He set out from France in 1790, and he's just the most unluckiest astronomer you can imagine. He went out in the first one in 1761, and he missed it. He was at sea, okay? So you cannot measure things when you're on sea. So instead of going back to France, the indefatigable Le Gentil stayed for another 8 years to wait for the next transit of Venus. Now that's called dedication. Okay, so he ended up in Manila, Spanish control, where the governor thought that suspected that he was a French spy and gave him hell. So when Pondicherry was being rebuilt after was returned to the French, he decided that I had enough. So he said that for the 1769 transit, I'm going to Pondicherry, French control. This is where his journey started. He went on a ship owned by Armenians from Madras, built in Surat, and captained by some Portuguese who were on a contraband mission at Malacca to escape Dutch duties. It sounds like made up, but it's really like a plot. So maybe he was a spy. Anyway, so he made a sojourn here because they said that Malacca water was too hard to collect. Because Malacca wasn't a deep water port, despite its location. Its location is more central, but it's a terrible place to water. Watering was important. You cannot just buy water. You have to actually bring them into the ship. It's very tedious work. So Pulau Pinang, apparently, according to Le Jontil, was a normal stop for Macau ships to water. So people come to Penang to have a drink. It's still doing it today. So the drinking spots, there were, of course, Batu Ferringhi at the north, but this is Teluk Kumba area. This is the Jereja area. This is the Pulau Betong, Pulau Betong Kecil. This is Kendi, actually. So they anchored somewhere here at Pulau Kendi. They sailed between the channel and somewhere in this place called Gemuruh. It's still there, Sungai Gemuruh area. Rexy and I explored it a few years ago. The description quite matches it. Anyway, no time to show it, but this is now, after checking through all the records, the earliest known pictorial view of any part of Penang. So it's Pulau Kendi, this is the Bukit Pulau Betong area, the Bukit Bakar Kapor. Yep. So this is the earliest known of the Penang Hills, okay, by the French. Just a quick one before we move on. The poor guy missed it again because he was in Pondicherry. He built an observatory, and then a cloud blocked it on the very day. And more cosmic significance, when he was in Penang on the 10th of March, okay, 1768, it was the very day that the British decided to obtain a ship to observe the Australia, which would become Australia, and to go to Tahiti, Captain Cook's ship, the Endeavour. So on the day that Endeavour was considered to be the ship, he was in Penang. And Captain Cook actually managed to observe it in Tahiti, the transit of Venus. So his tragedy doesn't end there. He went back to France, and apparently all his letters never reached France, so they have declared him dead. Okay, his wife has been married, sold all his property. So he's like the unluckiest astronomer ever. Okay, but thanks to him, we have the earliest view of Penang. So now this is the most interesting one. It's rarely seen. In fact, Afonso Albuquerque said that in the Flor de Mar that sank, there were the Javanese maps. Okay, so he said that they were the magnificent maps. We usually think that's the European maps that chart the way. Actually, they got it from the Arabs earlier, and of course the Indian navigation, all that. But they were all lost. So this is not that map, but it is a map from a very rare map from the Malay world. Okay, the British Library estimates, based on the rigging of the ship, you can see that's here. That it was sometime in the early part of the 1730s. Sorry, it's not 1700s. I slipped there. So if you see here, it says that Pucat Muka, Pulau Tikus, and Pulau Pinang. Interestingly, nothing else is named here in this map of the Malay world. It's actually, it's showing the route from the entrance of the Straits of Malacca to Patani on the other side. So it's going around there. Okay, by the name of this naming, it looks like it's from a Ottoman Rutter. Rutter is a navigation chart by from the 1500s, because the spelling is the same, Pulau Tikus and all that thing. Anyway, we are talking about hills here. So what is this thing here? It's actually the site of it, because on the French navigation book by D'Après Manivillette, it says that the Straits of Penang was busy with native crafts. Okay, so it was a protected waterway. And this Malay map actually shows the profile view as you sail across the Straits of Penang. So it's kind of a sophisticated map. It's not just showing roughly the shape of Penang and the islands around it, but also a profile, so you can know that you are passing by. That's very interesting. Okay, got it. So now we are back even deeper, 1654. Who are we talking about? You know, the Tanjung Puchat Muka is what you call Muka Head today. This map was captured by the Dutch. It's actually in the Maritime Museum of Rotterdam. It's by the Portuguese. Okay, so in 1640 they took over. But this is a Portuguese map, so it must have been earlier. It says Vigia dos Hollandies. It's the lookout of the Dutch. So at Muka Head, there was an anchorage, and the Portuguese wrote there, this is a lookout of the Hollanders. It's not a settlement, it's a lookout. And guess what? The place where the French watered is labeled, this bay, Teluk Kumba, Aguada, water. So the Portuguese knew about it. How far back can we go? 1621? Who are these people then? You finally meet the Ferengi, the Portuguese themselves. Okay, so this is from the Rata. Rata is a navigation book of Lisbon to Malacca and the return. So it mentions there that hill we saw. In the middle, it is high at the point of part which maketh a round hill. So Penang is pretty much known by the round hill. That's the entrance when you see it in the Muka Head area. This is from the Biblioteca Nacional Portugal. It's a rarely explored place of the early part of the Straits of Malacca, because due to the cursive thing, but I find it's very aesthetic, the way they write it. Now, we almost end in time. 1596. This guy here, okay, Jan Hoyens Linschoten, is the guy that broke the Portuguese Empire. He was in Goa, and he collected all the navigational knowledge going to the Far East. And this book is the one that opened the gates to literally to the British and the Dutch, the itinerary, the itinerario, the voyage. So in this very early book and the map produced, the company, you can see Pulau Pinang. Okay, and the island of Pulau Pinang lies 5 miles from the firm land. By this time, you can see that the language is really getting old. Okay, and the round hovel is an old word. Is this northern end Ronda hovel at the north point is round hovel, and the island lying. So for centuries, that round hill, which marks Muka Head, and interestingly, there's a lighthouse there. So it shows that this navigation mark, this hill, has already served as the entryway to Pulau Pinang for a very long time. So since this topic is mostly about hills, I will end here. And this is just to share with you that there is a big world out there that's not yet discovered in the other non-English sources. And there are a lot of interesting things to find. I hope we get a better understanding that these hills are just not for recreation. Of course, they are important, which the other speakers talk about, but it's an important navigation chart in one of the most consequential waterways in the world, the Straits of Malacca, and it has been for centuries. Thank you.
Jean, for opening our session really with Penang Hill's earliest chapters, those which we have really never even seen before, and of course for reminding us of how its foundations were laid before the 19th century. So now, from those beginnings, the hill's story really only grew more complex, layered with plantations, retreats, and even moments of power and refuge. And so to take us deeper into that evolution, I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Enzo Sim Hongjun. Enzo is a researcher in international politics, history, and defense studies. For many years, Enzo has actively shared his work on Malaya's early colonial history with the public, curating historical galleries across Malaysia. His journey began right here on Penang Hill at the 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚 bungalow, where he drafted the content that tells the full story of the funicular railway. In 2022, Enzo moved to KL to begin a career in marketing communications, where he spearheaded several landmark projects. These include the KL Story Gallery at Central Market, documenting the city's early history, and the OCBC Bank Bangsar exhibition. Now, beyond exhibitions, Enzo regularly speaks on Malayan history at Badan Warisan Malaysia, while his passion for international politics and modern armed conflict has led to interviews with Bernama News, Bernama World, and the Vietnam News Agency. Today, he also serves as Chief Museum Curator and Public Relations Director of Malaysia's very first Durian Museum, the KL Durian Experience Center. Today, Enzo will guide us through Penang Hill and evolution of a hill station, tracing how this landscape reinvented itself across centuries, from agriculture and convalescence to education and resilience. Please join me in welcoming Enzo Sim.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here. Really appreciate the chance that I've been given. Always great to be back to my roots, especially here in Penang Hill, where I first built my name and reputation, thanks to Dato' Cheong. Now, without much further ado, let's go into the main topic today, which is, of course, the Great Hill. Now, when I look at the Great Hill, I love to look at it through a historical evolutionary perspective. Nope. This button, right? Can I use that one? Or yeah, it's all right. Yeah. So first, when we look at the hill, there are a few perspectives that we need to look at, which is the roles that the hill has played throughout history. So the first role that I wanted to highlight is the role of the Great Hill in the spice trade of the Far East during the British colonial era. So in order to do that, we need to dive back into 1786 when Francis Light came here to establish the first European settlement in the Malay Peninsula, in the Malay archipelago. And with that establishment of the first European settlement, its first aim, first and foremost, its aim is to make it an important hub in that spice trade, in that maritime route. So as seen from the early records, by 1798, there were already 600 nutmeg and clove trees which has been planted and cultivated throughout the island. And with the opening of the first commercial plantations, the plantations on the crops that would make the British colonial empire money, massive money that we're talking about, the scale of it started growing beyond the lowlands in the island, or at that time known as the Prince of Wales Island among the British. Could you put the next slide, or is it workable already? Okay. All right. So when that expanded beyond the lowlands, the last slide, please. Yeah, the last slide. Yeah, thanks. Now, when it expanded beyond the lowlands, there was only one spot that the plantations could have expanded towards, and that is none other than the slopes of the Great Hill. Now, when the slopes were cleared, they were planted with coffee trees, 100,000 coffee trees, according to the early records, by none other than David Brown, the richest man and the largest landowner of the island at that time. And before the 100,000 coffee trees matured, he cleared further lands on the hill slopes of the Great Hill to plant an additional 200,000 coffee trees on the slopes. And of course, coffee trees are not the only crops that were planted throughout the island. They include the usual pepper, cloves, and nutmeg, those that were the weight of gold during that time and even during the Portuguese and the Spanish colonial era in the Far East. So another thing that I would like to highlight here is the importance of tea in this entire maritime trade. Now, tea was something that is really special in the, I think, to understand the early colonial history of the British colonial empire in the Far East, because tea were originally only monopolized by China up until 1825, when the British broke the monopoly by sending people, two key persons over here, G.J. Gordon and also Robert Fortune, into China to, in their own words, to study the methods of tea brewing, manufacturing, and plantation. You know, the complicated techniques that were used by the Chinese. But as modern records show, those are, we should use the word to steal that technology, to steal that technology that the Chinese held up until 1825. They brought those seeds and they grow it, allow it to be matured in Kew Gardens, and they were sent all over the place, especially first spot to India, to none other than Assam, and also the foothills in the Himalayas, in places like the Nilgiri Hills and so on. Now, to tie that back to Penang, when the varieties were developed, known as the Camellia assamica in the scientific Latin name, the Camellia assamica, they were experimented to be planted in the Malay archipelago, not in Cameron Highlands. That would only exist in 1929 by none other than Boti, by John Archibald Russell. But it was here, right where we are at right now, at Strawberry Hill, you know, where it was recorded by early British records that the first batch of Camellia assamica teas were planted by the British right here in the slopes as part of the effort to break the monopoly held by the Chinese, you know. And that was recorded by none other than the very famous botanist, Dr. Nathaniel Wallach, as shown in this, the gentleman here on the right-hand side over here. So he was the superintendent of the Calcutta Botanical Gardens. So he described in his diary that the finished tea was produced from the Great Hill as rather inferior due to the tropical weather of Penang and the low elevation of its hill. The small-leaf China variety can only thrive at a much higher elevation. So at that time, apart from the Camellia assamica, the Camellia sinensis, the small-leaf variety from China, were also planted here, but it failed. But it only thrived at higher elevations in the foothills of the Himalaya. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to show how important the Great Hill is as a testament, as a living testament that has shown its role as part of the effort of the British to break that Chinese monopoly in tea. Although it failed later on. No. And then the next one, on to the, again, on this very spot that we're hearing this talk right now, Strawberry Hill. So tucked away in Strawberry Hill, is a place which also witnessed, apart from the plantation of tea, which failed later on, which also, so this is a place that also witnessed the first strawberries being planted in the Malay Peninsula, not the Cameron Highlands again, or the Fraser's Hill, or any other highlands. Yeah. So this plot of land was granted to William Edward Phillips, who was 6 times the governor of Penang, the acting governor of Penang, before becoming the governor in 1820. So in August 1805, the government hill was described to have, as I quote the record, a neat bungalow abounds with choice and rare fruit trees, roses, strawberries, etc. in 1816, in a notice when it was put up for sale. And similar to many early bungalows of the hill at the time, Strawberry Hill House, as it was known, was leased out as a convalescent retreat, meaning a place for people to recuperate, to heal themselves from the tropical diseases down in the lowlands. So at a time when most bungalows were built as a single-story house with an atap roof, of course, in imitating those in British India, raised on brick or masonry pillars before the construction of the funicular railway in 1924, The Strawberry Hill House boasted 2 stories as shown in paintings dating from 1830 and 1844. This feature was added by an Armenian merchant whose name was 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚𝐧𝐿 Galastown, who was based in Penang and who bought this house in 1824. Now, of course, this modern incarnation of this house is not the one that is referred to in this record. It wasn't, all right? So let me just continue further on. The property then changed hands to none other than the Brown family, those descendants of the famous David Brown. And this happened by the late 1880s, before this hill was acquired back by the government in 1908 for only one purpose, and that is to designate this site for the Second Railway's upper terminus, or the upper station. Until it was replaced by a tea kiosk that was built, as the upper terminus didn't really came into fruition in this very spot. And so the tea kiosk, after its establishment in 1924, it was demolished at the end in 2005, when it was left rather abandoned for some time. So the photo over here shows the Strawberry Hill House, and the group of people standing there is believed to be the descendants of David Brown, the Brown family. So that is how remarkable it is that our archives that is kept in the drawers would show us our past. So, after having said about the importance of Penang Hill and the commercial plantation role of by the British colonialists, we right now turn towards one element: power, political power. So, the highlands in modern armed conflict studies and even in the past conflict studies, mountain and highlands is always associated to a commanding viewpoint, which the colonialists or anyone who has authority over it would strive to control for military strategic observation purposes. So it began with the British surveying the hinterlands when Francis Light established that first European settlement. Now, as depicted by Robert Smith's painting over here with the tall tree, titled "The View of the Great Tree," 1818, as part of that series of paintings which I personally really love, the administrators and surveyors set out to explore the forests and the hills of Penang Hill to achieve 2 objectives. Now, first, for the geological survey purpose that is very apparent in many colonial governments, even the French in Indochina. And second, to search for a strategic lookout point from where they can gain a clear view of the island for the defense, as mentioned by Eugene in the very first slide of his, where there was an ongoing Napoleonic War, where the British and the French were belligerent agents against one another. So there was a real threat where the French naval forces posed towards the defense of the early Prince of Wales Island. And then moving on to 1787, they finally found the first signaling station, but it's not yet the Great Hill. It was at Mount Erskine. Now, constructed in 1787, the first signal station was located at its peak, the very peak of Mount Erskine. A hilly track was plotted from 𝐼𝐸𝐻𝑇𝑚 to the peak of Mount Erskine, and a group comprising of British Marine surgeon, a rifleman, and Kafri slaves from Madagascar were assigned to man that signaling station. And they were housed in a small building adjacent to the flagstaff. But, however, as years go by, they realized there was one problem with this Mount Erskine peak. And that was because of the limited view, which is restricted to the north. So observers over there, stationed over there, they couldn't really observe and spot out the rest of the waters of Penang from other directions, especially those sailing from the west and the south. So by 1830, the post had fallen into disuse and decay, because by that time they have found another one, and that is none other than here. But before we go further up, we need to go back to 1788 as well, around that year, when it was believed that Light began laying the tracks up to Penang Hill, setting off from the suburbs of 𝐼𝐸𝐻𝑇𝑚. And he plotted a narrow and steep footpath all the way up to the highest point of the hill, which would later on be singled out and designated as the government hill. For obvious reasons, for government usage, for the construction of the very first government hill bungalow, and also the observation posts for military usage. So slowly, as the years gone by, the signaling station's function in Mount Erskine was obviously taken over by the government hill bungalow's signaling station. So it became the first bungalow to be built on the hill upon its completion in 1793 for the exclusive use of Francis Light and the top British officials at that time. But Light, as you know, his life was quite short. Very sad to be given way to malaria when he passed away on October 21st, 1794 at the age of only 54. So following his death, the Government Hill Bungalow underwent several phases of renovations throughout 1803 and 1805. And from a rather simple atap bungalow, it was transformed into an elegant colonial mansion with elaborate Anglo-Indian architectural designs typical of the 19th century British colonial mansions found throughout British India, in Ceylon as well. Now it was rebuilt using granite and masonry, of course. And with that, we began the transformation of that Government Hill into the name that we are also very familiar with, the Flagstaff Hill, because when the signaling station was moved over there, the Flagstaff was there as well, same as the ones that we've seen in Mount Erskine, to carry out a series of signalings to Fort Cornwallis below. So a small military detachment was stationed to identify possible threats from the French naval force, as I mentioned early on, and this post was rendered operators manning this Flagstaff for a more strategic vantage point in order to report back to the authorities in Fort Cornwallis regarding the size and skill of incoming ships, and most importantly, whether they are friendly nations or the enemy nations. So, interestingly, we also witness the change of technology up in the Flagstaff Hill too, because a semaphore or a shutter telegraph tower, which was brought to the island by the Admiralty, the British Navy at the time, in 1795 was added alongside that flagstaff for transmission of more detailed and complicated messages to the town down below. You can see part of that thing over here, the semaphore, down on the left, just above the Government Hill Bungalow. Now, apart from following the establishment of government authority on the hill, people feel that it's somewhere that is really exclusive. Just like how the British colonialists in Hong Kong view the peak, the Victoria Peak as well. Now, people start going up to the hill. They see that the height and also the fact that the British had built a Government Hill Bungalow over there as a sign of authority and that of a prestige. So Europeans at the time, there was a bungalow rush up there, and that really spurred the privatization, the first batch of privatization of the land on the Great Hill. So the first, as shown in this painting over here, this is Halliburton's Hill, or at the, which is at the Bellevue Hotel today. So the first sheriff of Prince of Wales Island, Thomas Halliburton, acquired this piece of land and built a simple bungalow in 1807 and named it after himself, of course, Halliburton's Hill. So this became the beginning of the privatization of the land on the hill by European officials. And in 1802, more people wanted to go up to the hill for only one purpose, and that is for recuperation and convalescence. So the convalescent bungalow began to be constructed and was completed in 1802, and it really shared similarities architecturally to the first bungalow, as it housed also 3 bedrooms. And the first doctor to be stationed there was none other than William Hunter, who was an East India Company marine surgeon who was transferred from Bengal in India. And soldiers were sent there regularly, those who were fighting the colonial wars on behalf of the British Empire in the colonial frontiers. So those injured soldiers or those who suffer from the tropical diseases, cholera, malaria, you name it, were sent up to the convalescent bungalow for recuperation. And this was not simply made up by people, because the miraculous function of the healing in healing people is recorded by this Dr. T.M. Ward, who was the assistant surgeon from the 35th Regiment of the Madras Native Infantry, who resided in Penang in the 1820s. In his research paper titled "The Contribution to the Medical Topography of Malacca and the Prince of Wales Island." So in the 1820s, he recorded the use of the hill as a sanatorium for officers from the British East India Company. And most importantly, he recorded that the healing effects of the hill is even more efficient and effective for recuperation rather than having them sent on lengthy trips to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, New South Wales in Australia, or China for that purpose. And the hill was also a popular convalescent spot for Dutch officers before their Dutch highlands were constructed in Sumatra, for example, the Brastagi. All right? So it was only developed in the 1920s. So before the 1920s, before the completion of Brastagi, the highland in Sumatra, the Dutch officers would sail all the way here, travel all the way up to Penang Hill for that recuperation. And that shows the importance of Penang Hill as a recuperative retreat. And one of the most famous guests is none other than the White Raja, the first White Raja who opened up Sarawak as his own kingdom, Sir James Brooke, who made 2 visits up the hill to recuperate from what was then known as intermittent fever. At a time when science was not that advanced yet, but it was proven to be malaria. But luckily he survived it. And so in 1886, the scale became bigger. So the convalescent was no longer enough, because the convalescent bungalow was only serving soldiers from the British East India Company, colonialists. So in 1886, the 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚𝐬 came up as a sanatorium before it became a hotel, which is more like a health resort in our modern definition. So mostly civilian officials from as far away as Burma and also the east coast of Sumatra would come over here and enjoy their trip for recuperative purposes. So guests at the 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚𝐬, like many other guests at that time, they were transported up on wooden sedan chairs all the way from the Botanic Gardens, which took well over an hour. So apart from these sedan chairs, they were also carried on, there's another option too, on Sumatran or Batak ponies of Mongolian and Arab stock that were imported from Delhi in Sumatra. And the ponies were also useful because they carry up the luggages up the hill. So that was how the people of the past improvised logistics. And by 1893, there was an Armenian, S.C. Satorkan, who started to manage this property before it changed hands in 1897, a few years later, to Captain John Kerr, who sailed passengers. He ran a shipping company to transport passengers from Sumatra and Penang back and forth from 1884 to 1895. And his wife took over, and his wife was known for her very attention towards detail in taking care of guests personally as well. And in 1905, brothers who were very famous in Penang, the owners, the founders of the E&O Hotel, who would later found fame in Singapore with the Raffles, with the Strand in Rangoon, Burma, all the grand hotels of Asia. The Sarkis brothers took over in 1905, all right? As seen in this postcard, in this picture postcard, by this time, it was already under the management of the famous Sarkis brothers, Arshak Sarkis, Tigran Sarkis, Martin Sarkis, Aviet Sarkis, the 4 brothers. Now, in addition to the E&O Hotel down there, the 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚𝐬 Hotel was promoted by them as a romantic honeymoon getaway spot for guests. And it boasted at that time, initially, 9 sizable bungalows in addition to the vastly expanded main building. And then in 1919, transportation costs started rising. And competition from similar health resorts that started popping up in the region posed a business threat to the 𝐧𝐞𝐾𝐧𝐠 brothers at the Crag Hotel. So he sold it to the government and was placed under the Federated Malay States Railway Management. And the operation was cut short by the outbreak of the Second World War and was reopened only briefly from 1947 until 1954. So now we are starting to seeing a transition from the spot as a health sanatorium to that of an education hub. Now, this picture look familiar. Of course it is. It's taken in here, right here in Penang Hill, during the Queen's visit. So in 1955, we saw the beginning of the Hill as an education hub as well. At that time was a time when, after the end of the Second World War, Malaya was still caught in the turbulence of the Cold War. We were caught in the turbulence of the communist insurgency, which the British don't call it a war for insurance purposes. They call it the Malayan emergency. So from 1948 up until 1960, we had the first Malayan emergency. So because of the threats from the communist insurgents who targeted European planters. Now, the first shot, of course, we know it. It happened in Sungai Siput in Perak in 1948, and then the insurgency happened. So from then on, communist insurgents started targeting European planters. They were the first victims to the war, of course. And so in 1955, the Incorporated Society of Planters, or ISP, started looking for alternative locations to build the schools for the planters' sons and daughters. And so Penang Hill, for the sake of its stability, for its safety from the disturbances from the communist insurgencies on the ground, became the ideal spot for that education purposes. And apart from the establishment of the primary boarding school, the Upland School, which a lot of us has already known, I want to draw attention towards another school that was also opened up here, which is the Tanglin School. Now, on the second year of the Malayan insurgency, Tanglin School originally had their home in Singapore, but was later on moved by its principal, Miss Griffith Jones, to the Cameron Highlands in 1933, when Cameron Highlands was first opened up as a Highland retreat to cater to the Federated Malay States officials. So when she opened up that school, it became a success until the Second World War and the insurgency broke out. Miss Griffith Jones herself, which is seen over here in the middle, he was also captured as a POW, a prisoner of war, who survived her days in the Sime Road camp and also the Changi prison under the notorious and brutal Japanese occupation and persecution. And at that time, in 1949, he wanted to open up back the school in Cameron Highlands, but the situation is simply not suitable for her to do so. So her attention turned towards Penang Hill. And so an alternative location, as stated in this newspaper cutting, was opened up here in Penang Hill as one of the spots for her school, her boarding school. And then in November, a little bit of a backdrop of her as well, this amazing lady who is also still buried in Tapa because of her love for the Malay Peninsula. When after having succeeded in founding the Tanglin School in 1925 and 1934, the expatriates' children would be educated in the boarding school before being sent back to Europe for a much later day education, right? So as seen in this newspaper cutting, by 1957, he bid farewell to her illustrious education career and settled down back in Cameron Highlands. But her story and the fact that she moved that school to Penang Hill during those turbulent years shows how Penang Hill has evolved into its role as an educational hub as well. And this is how children in Cameron Highlands were transported to school, not in a school bus, but in armed personnel carriers, APCs. And this is how she bid farewell. Now, the school is right now the Balas Holiday Chalet, which I'm a regular as well whenever I visit Cameron Highlands. And having concluded the part of the educational hub, our attention now turned towards war, all right? So when the war happened when the Japanese arrived in their boots and their bicycles and their tanks over here. It of course caused panic, and Penang at that time was an undefended city because the heavyweight defenses regarded by the British were all retreated to Fortress Singapore, or in mainland itself, all the defenses has already been concentrated in Johor by the Australian. And so because of this, Penang became undefended, and the Japanese, despite of that, bombed Penang as well. And when they came here, locals started panicking. So at that time, the caretakers who were working in the Penang Hill bungalows, the bungalows in Penang Hill, they began taking in their extended relatives. So relatives, friends, whoever that they know would come in as some additional caretakers for the sake of hiding from the Japanese. And I wanted to show what happened during the war. So during the occupation, a lot of the bungalows, as spoken to people like Uncle Raja, they were acquired by the Japanese and turned into storage depots for your daily commodities like sugar, food, and even things like gasoline for the military vehicles usage by the Japanese. Then after the war, there was a time known as the BMA, or the British Military Administration, which came here to the Malay Peninsula in 1945, took over for a temporary time on 3rd of September. And these images that I'm going to show you in a very quick rapid fire mode due to time restriction are related to that time, the BMA time. And it really showed what life was like when the Royal Air Force garrison took over Penang Hill as part of that British military administration. Now take a look at all these rare archival images. This one is, of course, the Aythorpe bungalow, as seen with the British troops, RAF troops in front, pushing their own supplies. And the next one over here, a photo taken by Corporal T. Chadwick, showed another colleague cooking in one of the bungalows, and some of it was taken in the tea kiosk. And of course, when they were here, they carried out community service as well, as war has already ended. So they were offering free medical care to residents of Penang Hill. And then in one of these more joyous moments after peace has returned, they were learning Hindi from a local schoolboy. And also, of course, poker cards were nonetheless, a staple daily for British troops during that time. And higher-ranking officers reading papers, writing letters back home for their loved ones. And last but not least, all right, as I said just now, the emergency broke out even after the Second World War as tensions built between the Malayan races. And so the emergency conference took place a day immediately after the planters were killed in Sungai Siput Estate in Perak. A day after that incident, the conference was none other held in Bel Retiro for its relative safety, away from the troubles in the jungles of Pahang, Perak, and so on. And among those who attended were the big names of the British colonial government. Sir Malcolm MacDonald, with the one with the spectacle, the Commissioner General of Southeast Asia, who was stationed in Singapore, and Sir Edward Gen, who was the British High Commissioner of Malaya, who proposed, of course, the very unpopular Malayan Union. And the talks were held to decide on emergency measures to be adopted by all Malayan states to contain that insurgency. And one of that key decisions made at Bel Retiro, behind the closed doors, was to use Pulau Jerujak as a detention camp for suspected communist sympathizers and insurgents from the MPLA, which is the armed wing of the Communist Party of Malaya. So the hill, during that emergency time, although it's relatively safer than the lowlands, the jungles of Perak, the rubber plantations in Pahang, and so on, the hill witnessed its fair share of incidents, including the most famous one, the murder of Brother Symphorian in 1954 in none other than the Brothers Bungalow, and also an ambush on the hill involving a detachment of British security forces in their Land Rovers in 1954, and the sabotage of the funicular railway several times by communist sympathizers in December 1950, and other incidents as well. And with that, I shall end my talk. Thank you very much.
Very much, Enzo, for bringing us forward from the early 19th century. If Eugene brought us backwards in time from that point, now we've all caught up to modern history. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce our third speaker, Datuk Dr. 𝐸𝐞𝐵𝐤, Executive Director of Penang Institute, aka Boss for me. He also serves on the Penang 2030 Advisory Committee and sits on the boards of Digital Penang, St. Saviour's Institution, and the Prince of Wales Island International School. Now, 𝐸𝐞𝐵𝐤 began his think tank career in 2004 at Singapore's ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, where he was deputy director from 2011 to 2017 and continues today as a senior visiting fellow. He is also the festival director of the Georgetown Literary Festival, held every November. If I can just input a little marketing here, it's happening on the 27th to the 29th of November this year, the Georgetown Literary Festival. All right, and he's also the founder editor of several influential publications, including ISIS Perspective, Trends in Southeast Asia, of course, the Penang Monthly, which Eugene and Rexy here are frequent contributors, and of course, issues policy briefs. He also writes regularly for a column in The Age Malaysia. His notable works include the Eurasian Core and its Edges, Dialogues with Wang Gangwu on the History of the World, the award-winning The Reluctant Politician, The Life and Times of Tun Dr. Ismail, As Empires Fell, The Life and Times of H.S. Lee, and many more books. Today, he will be sharing his reflections in Penang Hill, Paths Not Taken, an exploration of how history unfolds not only through the choices made, but also through the possibilities left behind. Please join me in welcoming Datuk Dr. 𝐸𝐞𝐵𝐤.
Thank you, Mei-Ting. Now, I knew that I was going to be on the panel with these two guys who are quite mad about Penang Hill. So what am I going to say after they've had their talk, right? So I'll talk about the things they're definitely not going to talk about, which is what Penang Hill is not. So I decided to take the, I think, rather good title, the Paths Not Taken, right? Penang Hill being famous for paths, as it were, which may be the reason some of you are here today. Anyway, I'll start by problematizing history itself, I think. And I'll try to do that by a short discussion. I'll cut it as shortly as possible. On tradition, heritage, and legacy, these are words that we use a lot in Malaysia, in Penang especially, aren't they? First, to show a certain difference between them and how they're connected. Now, traditions are the practices of a community, its engagement with the past, and its values put into words and rituals. Most importantly, the values bit, right? Not all traditions are the same, as you. Heritage, that's curated cultural assets, for want of a better way of describing it shortly. And third, legacy is the outcome of traditions and heritage. It is our received cultural assets waiting to be put in motion. That's looking forward, as it were. It's not just something dead, right? So shortly, heritage is the what, tradition is the how, legacy is the why, and what's next. Now, all that to lead to a simple point I want to make before I start talking about the subject at hand, which is history itself. That history is the sum of narratives. It's not something that happened and that's it. There is a lot of human activity after the fact involved in the creating of history itself. So history in many ways then, if not essentially, is creative nonfiction, right? It doesn't just happen in its history. We act on it very often politically. Power is involved, like Eugene was hinting at. And a good point I thought was something hinted at Eugene, that one could actually, why do we talk about Penang Hill so separately? Is it not just an a rock? Is it not just a hill? The whole island is actually a hill with plains to the east, to the west, and so on and so forth. But we don't see that anymore because of how the British exercise power and their way of colonizing made Penang Hill, as if it were different from the floodplains, as it were. That's an interesting point. I think one should explore that. What does Penang look like if it were described totally as one, right? Then maybe we don't need Penang Hill Corporation. No, I'm joking. And okay, so human history happens. So human history happens through guesstimates very often, and there are many, many, many choices made, a lot of exercise of power involved, and a lot of making do, right? That's one of the main points I would like you to remember, if anything, from my talk, which is that Penang Hill, what it is today, is not a string of definite decisions. It's a back and forth, making do, and so on. In the end, you have a picture, and then people today then is able to have a narrative where we can understand the past and so on. But a lot of things are not there. A lot of things are, not included. So this just generally to take up what I was saying. And so when I was just, like I was saying, you look at any phenomenon, and of course you have to not only look at the basic narrative. And I think our two earlier speakers have actually done us a good service in that they not only did they talk about the normal narrative, but I think they did give certain fringe reasons and data and information about what happened. Okay, so what about Penang Hill? The path not taken. I thought one way to talk about that is to look at certain other hill resorts, and why Penang isn't like that, or to what extent is Penang like them. So I decided to take Simla, India, first of all. They're just like on Penang Hill, the British started with very strict racial segregation, only white people allowed, sort of thing, right? So that's already a very clear, not only an exercise of power, it was also an exercise of a certain ideology. So that's one thing we shouldn't forget either. It explains why Penang Hill, even today, after independence, looks the way it does. Now for Simla, it became an administrative center and a political capital even. So imagine if Georgetown had grown to encompass the foothills and the top ridges. It could have happened that way if there had been, I would say that later. I hope it's here. Yeah. I'll try not to ad-lib too much since I've got everything written down. Now, if enough funding was available from the beginning to build infrastructure for easy public process, Penang Hill might have become very connected by infrastructure to Georgetown itself from the very beginning. And that would have, I suppose, Penang Hill wouldn't have many trees on top of it, but it could have happened. But because Penang in the end wasn't an important colonial outpost where administration was concerned, so I think we avoided that. What happened instead was it went to Singapore. And so Singapore, became a big city by itself, and Penang Hill we still have our biosphere diversity and so on, thanks to geopolitical events like that. Now, one thing I would like to point out here is that because of Penang's history, we also see that's not one thing we talk about very much today after independence. But I think Penang had always had a minimalist sort of governance. A lot of things happen in Penang because of Penang's people. It's the private sector that drives things, and being an outpost, I suppose, for Francis Light and the British in the beginning, it served them to let people do all the work, and then you just, coming after and arranging and governing. And I suspect one could even today say that about Penang governance. It is private sector driven, and the state facilitates as and when it can, sometimes a little too late, sometimes just running after after the horse has escaped, as it were, right? But being a modern government, you can tell the public that's the case. But for us, I think we should remember that very often the state is not the all-powerful people they might want to make themselves look like, because that's how it has to be played. But in the case of Penang, I think that our strength is actually our own people. The entrepreneurship, the passion, the activism of Penang people. And I think, well, today is a case in point, of course. Now, some people might not know Penang was supposed to become very, very important for the British. And then later on, they decided after they got Singapore, after the Napoleonic Wars, they were much more confident. That is a main point, if I may take a minute to mention that the British that founded Penang and the British who founded Singapore, or the Britain that founded Penang and the Britain that founded Singapore, are quite different, because the Napoleonic Wars came in between. And by the time Singapore was founded, Britain was number one. When Penang was founded, Britain was not number one. Britain had to deal with the French Navy, Britain had to deal with the Dutch. I mean, that's a serious thing. And that could be one reason why Penang is so much more relaxed. It was founded by a more relaxed Britain. Singapore was, no, we're heading for China, we're going to take the world. So, yeah, so Singapore, no joke, right? No humor, please. More we are getting there. And yeah, so Penang was the Straits Settlements capital for a while it was the fourth presidency as well. So you can see that switch in British strategy back in London, or in India perhaps, that first Penang, that was a great asset. And then with Singapore coming, well, maybe not. We'll just put Penang as number 2 and we'll call it all the Straits Settlements and so on. And that's a very lucky twist for Penang. I think a historical twist. It saved us from becoming Singapore. Yeah, this is not Penang Hill, right? 𝐿𝐤𝐴, you're happy this doesn't look like that. This is Simla, I think. Now, 𝐿𝐤𝐴 did not give me a grant to go take pictures in Simla. So this is of the internet, really, right? I mean, there are loads of other, I'm sure it doesn't look only like that, right? I'm sure there. Not if 𝐿𝐤𝐴 can help it. Yeah. And yeah, Penang maybe being small was also an advantage, right? Couldn't do very much with it. And there were no huge populations around. Like in Simla, you had India around you, and soon, you're drowned out by the huge populations. And it was, like I said, it was a transit. We have to look at that as well. It was a transitional step in British colonization in this part of the world. It wasn't any destination. It was, they were moving on. And therefore, Penang becomes unique in that sense. And it went on its own way. In the end, it became an entrepot, cultural hub. And that's our legacy today. That's what Penang today wants to see itself. And we see those historical assets as what we can develop further. And I think we did not suffer economic and political pressures that Simla had to suffer. And in many ways, I would say even after independence, Penang was seen as rather peripheral. All the Malaysian development happened in the Klang Valley. Penang slowly got a bit forgotten. And again, why Penang has survived to today and actually become really, really important in geoeconomics, again, it's thanks to Penang people, right? Even our E&E and so on that we're so proud of, we're part of the chip war now, although we don't want to be. It's thanks to how Penang people survive. So I might get into trouble for saying this, but I think when we look at how Penang's industrialization has happened, this is how Penang has survived over the last 60 years. This is not merely nation building. I think it's more Penang surviving than Malaysian nation building, which explains a lot of reasons why there are certain weaknesses in our industrial ecosystem because of that. Second example, Dalat to the French and to Vietnam. Now, of course, the French colonized differently from the British. They were more passionate about their civilizing of the world. They were the Republican. They were the revolutionaries. They were going to change the world. And so Dalat was envisioned as France in the Far East. And so it was built very much to be France in the China itself. Now, if we compare Dalat then to Penang Hill, there are certain reasons why Penang couldn't have gone that way. First, the terrain would not have allowed that kind of development. And second, the British were not colonizing the same way as the French were doing, right? They were more, like Napoleon's called them, a nation of shopkeepers. So they were not revolutionaries in that sense, right? So all these were pragmatic moves that they made, the taking of Penang, taking Singapore, and so on. And the civilizing of the world wasn't that ever in the middle of for the reasons for their colonizing. And so Penang was more an outpost than a territorial settlement. It was because it came first in this part of the world. It supported the rest, as it were. So going to Singapore, you would probably stop here in Penang. When you're leaving Penang, when you're leaving Singapore back to Europe, you probably stop here. And like you guys were saying, this is where you get your drink, right? Okay. And I suppose this keeping the top of Penang Hill as a reserve for Europeans also helped in keeping the locals out, as it were. And now I think it keeps most people out from building further. And this is what we live off. This is why Penang Hill today is still a popular resort, because we've got the space, we've got the path to walk, and so on. Yeah. That's not Penang Hill, is it? I won't insult you by reading out what you can read for yourself, I suppose. But quite a lot of words here, but you see my major point. Penang Hill developed in the periphery in that sense. It was supposed to be a resort for the British, the colonialists. Even when Enzo was talking about education hub, that was for the whites, as well, right? It's for the children of the colonialists who had to be kept safe from communists and so on. So that is the history that led to Penang Hill still being rather preserved. Yeah. So nothing's only bad or nothing's only good in history, as it were. Depends on how long a period you want to look at. Yeah. Okay. I won't read all this up, but if there's any point you want to talk about later, let's do it that way. The lack of funding, as Jock would testify to, is still a reality today, I'm sure. Which is a good thing sometimes, right? You have too much funding, you're going to get overdevelopment. This idea that we can balance between development and conservation, that's always dreaming a bit much. The best way to do that is not to have money. Yeah. I think that's why the corporation was founded a few years ago, right? To find that balance. So that money comes in a controlled fashion as well. Now, we go to Malaysia, then I'll go quickly. 2 more examples. I don't have much time left, right? Okay, doesn't matter. But okay, Cameron Highlands, that was mentioned earlier. We think of it today as a place where we have boaty, and so on and so forth. My family and I visited last year, actually. It's the first thing. I mean, it's green, but then of course, you feel this reaction. What the hell? You know, it's very agricultural. It's clearly becoming a hub for, commercial agriculture has taken over. Penang Hill is not, maybe at the footlands, you can say that, but not otherwise. I took a look. Apparently, there are as many as 70 agricultural segments privately owned at the bottom of Penang Hill. We hope they don't climb up higher and higher. So the tendency is that, right? You go up, and the higher you go up, there may be less flat land, but then you get cooler climate. You start planting wheat, and so. But this is a big thing. To my mind, this is a big thing. UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, pushed and succeeded by people like 𝐿, right? You were involved in that, right? That's a 𝐿. So I think this is important. It also gives us this perspective. Little Penang has the UNESCO heritage of Georgetown, and then we have this on a little place, And Penang Institute had been fighting. We might succeed, we might not, for the middle bank to also become a reserve. So in this little area, you're going to have an urban UNESCO reserve and this biosphere reserve, and then you have a maritime reserve. That would complete the picture, right? So talk to your politicians about the third. Well, it's green. And of course, being so hilly and all that also acts against too much development, I suppose. There's a natural defense to some extent. Now, if Penang had gone that way, we would see terrace farming throughout, right? With corresponding deforestation. And you would have a permanent farming community up here, which we don't really want. Environmental degradation would have been serious. I think until today, we do claim that much of the reserve is actually primary forest, right? So that's quite amazing, really. And of course, water is always a consideration for us to not overuse. We did have some natural disasters and landslides, as Dr. 𝐿 would testify to. I think it took up a lot of his time a few years ago, wasn't it? But I think and I hope that it's sort of an anomaly. Penang Hill itself and Penang itself is not really prone to natural disasters apart from certain flooding now and then. Another Malaysian hill resort to look at would be Fraser's Hill itself. It's not very as popular a term, or it's not mentioned very often among us anymore compared to when I was young. Fraser's Hill and Cameron Highlands were mentioned as synonyms almost, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Okay, what else do I have to say about it? Well, the history of it, there was a lot of mismanagement in Fraser's Hill in the beginning. And despite everything, if Penang Hill had suffered that fate, we wouldn't have looked very nice here. And not only that, its reputation would have declined. And that despite what one thinks, Penang Hill's reputation is actually very good, even internationally. Now, the forming of the Penang Hill Corporation, I think, provided an efficient vehicle for state intervention that to increase tourism numbers. Of course, there will be some who say that's not good, but it's a balancing game again. Infrastructure investments, and accompanied by interest and stronger commitment from the rest of us. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Sorry. So what does it mean? We did all those paths that we didn't take or we weren't pushed onto and so on. The paths avoided, the paths abandoned. It's a question of, what if and happily not. It's a balance in that. What we now have was what I mentioned. We have this UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is, a really big step, a big asset for us going into the future. Well, to an extent, managed tourism, and not only the balancing of visitor access, but I think local visitor access too, because that's why we do have a double tier pricing and so on. And I think in recent times there have been a repurposing of some of our bungalows, so now it's become much more possible to stay overnight up on the hill and so on. Educational galleries, of course, the habitat here, I think, well, it's visually really impressive, I would say. And most Penang Hill pictures on the internet nowadays just simply, show, among other things, they're bound to show the treetop walk. What do you call that again? The Curtis thing, yeah. Okay. So what is Penang Hill? An adaptive hybrid might be one way to describe it, and then you go down into the details of what these two have been providing. Yeah, of course. Looks quite impressive, doesn't it? Good photographer, I suppose. So you have that clear divide, which I think we live very much of and appreciate. And we hope going forward that it will remain that way. Yeah, these are some things I noticed that we are actually doing. That the infrastructure has to be built, but in a controlled manner, more consciously developed. And we have to control the farming community and push them towards organic and regenerative practices. Okay, not as good a picture. Okay, and remember to take a hike. Thank you.
Thank you, Kibeng, for making us reimagine Penang Hill in a way that thankfully it hasn't gone down to the paths such as Dalat and Fraser's Hill and Simla. So it's good to sort of not take for granted, I suppose, things or how Penang Hill has developed or not developed in certain directions. Now, the floor is actually already open for questions if any of you have any questions. So just simply raise your hand if you have any questions, and I think we'll have the crew pass the mics around. But if not, I think I'd like to start first. I noticed throughout all the three presentations, the one real key point actually is the narration of history, right? And it's really how whether it was a purely British colonial narrative or other narrations, which I feel really reflects what Dr. Ung has just mentioned, the exercise of power. So whoever writes history would be those who would have or pretend to have power, right? So I think historical records, which Eugene started off, brought us to different kinds of narratives, not purely from the British, but from other powers as well. And so I was just wondering, it's all these imaginations of what the history is and all, and of course whoever who writes it, who has the point in controlling how people understand history, and of course in today's talk, Penang Hill itself. So Eugene, your research really highlights Penang Hill's role before colonial development. And so how does recentering the hill's pre-19th century history challenge the dominant colonial narrative that we so often hear? And what does that shift mean for how Penangites perhaps should understand their own heritage today?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. For those who read my writings, I'm the least challenging person. This is more of my, maybe that's the pure research part. It's like, oh, that's funny. I want to know the Ferengis, and I just fall into the rabbit hole. So it may be a little bit shallow, but you challenge the narrative. I would say that there are various roles for researchers. That's the primary ones, where the fact of digging it up alone is the challenge. Then the interpretation, the frameworks, there are far more people qualify in that. I'm more like an archaeologist of written stuff. I do the digging. So yeah, does it challenge the narrative? It offers a different perspective. It's not about challenging. It's to use the word multipolar. It's the French saw it, the Malays saw it. Each of them, all of them had one thing in common though. It was a waterway, and all of them wanted water. So I guess Penang is very water related. We also had the first waterworks here. So I can't answer it directly because I'm not actually challenging narrative, but offering different to know that there are other places for future researchers that is not only in the British records. And I think that would change the narrative even more. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm talking from another perspective. Actually, what Dr. May was trying to say was just the centricity. Eugene covered the French records. Eugene also covered the earlier recognition of Penang Hill from the perspective of explorers and mariners. So there wasn't any challenge. It was a contestation of how the various century, Portuguese, the Dutch, and how they came in. So from their vantage point and the angle that they sailed in, they saw a different Penang. But the common thread and the earlier readings enhanced the fact that Penang was a favored water place, which means that our quality water has attracted Macauans, Dutch, Portugal. And to say that Malacca does not have direct source is because our water comes from, you know where, the hills. And Dr. Chok, I think that should be your next sustainment. The famed water, and they say sweet water. In Scott and Brown's writing, they say the sweet water of Penang, fresh, clean, and ultra, I think, related to the casts that we have, the limestone, not as extensive as Ipoh.
Thank you very much. Just for a disclaimer, Rexy and I have basically crawled around the whole hill, every nook and cranny, to explore it. Yeah, we spent a little bit too much time on Mount Erskine, which actually most of Penangites these days may know as Pearl Hill. It's not the one, the cemetery, because the developer name was Pearl Hill Sdn Bhd in 74, and the name got totally erased. It is the child of the Napoleonic Wars. Although Marcus Landon, a friend of mine, he first mentioned about Stony Hill, where Captain Light wanted to drag it up in the 1787, which is quoted in Enzo's very excellent book, if you want an overview of Penang Hill. So, but it was published about a year before that. We got the East India Company records that showed that Light didn't went through with that plan. So there wasn't that painting actually. The Mount Erskine Signal Station is by William Petrie, who was really concerned about the Napoleonic Wars. They wanted the early warning system. So it was ready by 1813. And all things are related. It didn't close because of according to the East India Company records, history is collaboration. Once we have more information, we can interpret it more. The minutes actually say that they closed it simply because of, like any corporation, budgeting. They got a new project. Guess what the new project was? Singapore. They actually wanted to build a system from Fort Cornwallis. They signal, when they see the ships coming in from Mount Erskine, they'll signal the fort, and the fort will signal up to here, then to Mount Burney, which is called Bukit Kecil now, on the other side, and then to Mount Palmer, which is actually the third flagstaff, which is written in Penang Monthly too. So we would have a signaling station that can transmit from north to south the entry of ships in 4 minutes. It never came true because guess what? Singapore project. So by 1824, the Mount Erskine thing was closed down, and then it rotted away. So that's the origin of it. Yeah, that's the first flagstaff. It's always had that. Yes. The Mount Erskine also functioned, so it was a two-way. They could signal it. But they didn't complete the Mount Burney one, which is today called Bukit Kecil, a very small hill at the Bartley Pulau side. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator, and also special thanks to all the panelists. I try to link my experience with my experience in 𝐴𝐿𝐶, Taiwan, and Penang Hill. 2 years ago, I have a chance to spend one night, during the winter, deep winter in 𝐴𝐿𝐶, Taiwan, and there are actually many hotels mushrooming up there. A little bit messy. I don't think because they don't have a good Penang Hill corporations there. A little bit messy. But among all the many hotels, we purposely choose one, the one that be ancient because of the history. Is they call themselves the oldest hotels in the 𝐴𝐿𝐶, Taiwan, and it's well reserved, very impressive. And some of the rooms they reserve, the former Prime Minister of Japan, and who been stay there. So I try to link it to the Penang Hill. We don't have many hotels here, but we do have a lot of very unique architecture of bungalows, the mansions. I recall myself when I was in my high school during 80s, almost as an active member of the St. John Ambulance, we always organize inter-schools activity and then spend a few days, renting a very the mansions, the bungalow at a very affordable price as a poor students. But now, I believe that if the Penang guys able to being attracted to spend more times, stay overnight, 1 day, 2 days, 3 nights, in Penang Hill, I think the love of Penang Hill will enhance, will be fortified, strengthened. So we hope that corporations from multiple party, government or PHC, we be able to bring this experience, the good bungalows offer to the Penang guys or the school students. So let them have experience, renting at an affordable rate and spend a few nights here. And I will be very grateful to bring this good memory back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think if I could comment on behalf of Dato' Cheok, there are several bungalows up here which are quite affordable for visitors to spend their nights here and to really enjoy the hill as natural as it can be. There's one Hickory, and then of course Hillside, and then of course for the more luxurious travelers, there's the iTrope, right? Yeah. Yes.
May I? Oh, sorry.
Just riding on to his suggestions here, there are many, I would say, pre-war houses in and about Penang that are being left abandoned. Are there any plans for the state government to step in to work as an intermediary to kind of rent this property out and manage them like the Singapore government does for the pre-war houses? Rent it out at the higher prices. The money that we earn from there actually goes back into the maintenance, upkeep, and also effort to kind of like maintain other pre-war house properties. They're being left abandoned is such a waste. When we drive around, we see these houses being abandoned and rotting. And it's an eyesore, number one. Number two, it's such a waste. I mean, it can be turned into an income maker and also preserving the history of it.
Well, may I? Well, I'll try to partly answer that if I may before Cheok. But also there was a point I did not take up because I would have taken too much time about Penang Hill and all the other resorts, is the very idea of hill resorts. Now, it actually needed people coming from the temperate zone into the tropics to even think of hill resorts. Tropical people don't think of hill resorts. No, let me, no, let me finish my point. What I'm saying is there are natural reasons why it's so difficult to maintain hill resorts, because in the tropics, you know how things work. You need a lot of investments. You need big investors to have resorts going. So it'll be hotels, hotel chains, and so on that will take care of your hill resorts. Smaller companies, it's a much harder project. Small hotels running hill resorts becomes quite a challenge. Is my point.
I'll just add to that. So since it's touched on Penang Hill and Penang Hill Corporation, so before that, I just kind of it's a bit of putting things in context. Actually, one of the things that why the Penang state government set up Penang Hill Corporation is to ensure the developmental policies and controls are put in place. So when it was set up, I joined 2017. The first thing we did was to relook at all the historical documents, the local plan, special area plans, and all the good stuff that we combined, and then we created the new special area plans. There have been strategic objectives to convert, repurpose some of the bungalows into, and now I call it public accommodation. So I tried very hard for Great Hotel to relook into the development and then rebuild into some of the historic hotels that you find around the world. In my past life, I had the honor and opportunity to stay in many of the famous hotels, Fairmont, in the U.S., and Del Coronado in San Diego. It all has historical context. Where later years you see movie stars and VVIPs and presidents and prime ministers of the world that they spent. So I tried to bring back, but unfortunately I could only do one. Hillside. Hillside was built, I think, was 1925, and it was heavily dilapidated, just left abandoned. So the Penang Hill Corporation decided to set aside funds to do minor restoration. When I say minor, minimum, build, restore it, the roof, and so on. And then we had the kind of a public-private partnership model to do an RFP to lease it out to a private sectors or private companies to manage that as a resort. And that has proven to be a successful model. And I've been pushing state government to follow that model, and I think that will be a win-win. I agree with you. They also agree with you. Of several malls that we tried, Convalescent Bungalow was said to be built in 1803. One of probably the oldest hotel on Penang. On Penang Hill at least. We tried that, but until today it's in the hands of a different organization. Fern Hill, that. And then you have Woodside, also left kind of abandoned for many years. I've been in the corporation for 10 years, but it is what it is now. We do make conscious effort to try to restore some of the bungalows. It was kind of as you put it, a waste. Yeah. But we're still making the effort. Another bungalow that we restored, conserved, was 1937 𝐏𝐞𝐧𝐚, which turned into an information center, museum, mini museum. If you have time, please do a visit. Give you a historical perspectives of as what our distinguished speakers here. By the way, I'm so glad I'm here. First time I met Eugene, I read about his article for many years, Penang Monthly in various places. And so, of course, I know. So we, no. 𝐴𝐻 is a museum information center focusing on education. We are doing another one, which is the Gate House right in front of Ballarat Road, originally built in 1875. I'm not sure whether my date is correct. That is also to support the Flagstaff Hill. The original was meant to be quite Gate House. The guard house was, an office, for that area. So we have projects in progress. We also will be turning into some sort of interpretation center museum for to bring back some of the golden memories of Penang Hill. I think it's good that we, not every asset you turn into a commercial prospect. So some are suitable for hotels, some are not. Hillside, maximum you can only have about 20 people with all the rooms and things like that. So I think there are places where you need people to come to Hill. I always speak. I always have very interesting dialogue with Penang Forum, NGOs, and say, look, we cannot reverse Penang Hill back to the past, back to making the jungle. So, but we can do a balanced development. Penang Hill Corporation is embarked on a balanced development in the sense that the places that have been developed, we are strengthening them, we're modernizing them, putting the safer infrastructures. So although you see a lot of constructions right now, they're all on the exact, on the existing footprint. No clearing of trees. It's all building, with the exception of cable car project, which we needed to put towels and things like that, and to help solve some of the issues. Cable car project is not just a cable car. It's actually a overall master plan. And I only talk about it when I get a chance, is to revamp the Botanic Garden all the way out. So in the future of Botanic Garden, you will see a grand entrance, no public vehicle to be allowed to park left and right. On the weekends, you could walk freely. You could do it today, because there's already an experiment. You see there's somebody blocking the road, and then with the exception, of course, you need the vehicles from authorized vehicles. Those people, the Botanic Garden needs to do work. Hill residents need to access the hill and so on. But by and large, it's all has been limited down to only a set of small vehicles. That will be the future of Botanic Garden, and bringing the mobility, increase the accessibility to Penang Hill and coming down. Cable car to me allows the senior citizens to be able to access the hill quicker. Funicular system, actually, with all the steps and the steep walk, it was getting harder and harder. So it was a kind of an overall a lot of thinking behind in how we do it. Other than that, there will no more new development, no high-rise buildings, no shanty town that you like that you see in the Simla or things like that. Not even. Yes, that's what we want to. We want people to stay on the hill for 2 nights actually. I think for me, if we stay the third night, it would get a bit boring. So, with the exception of scientists, we also want to build a limited accommodation for scientists to stay on the hill to do their research. Keeping actually brought up UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. To me is a very, very important, very, very strategic recognition and listing for the Penang State, because the focus of Biosphere Reserve is research education. Research and education. So Penang Hill Corporation now started hire a small team of scientists. So I'm expecting them to facilitate driving research projects in biotech, PhD in biotech, master's degree in chemistry, in biodiversity. So why we do that? Because we need to understand how the global climate change will impact the biodiversity. Even the building, the structures, things like that. The economic activities, and so on. So I hope, and then you will see continuous development for small parcels of lands that has been developed, left abandoned. The food court we are working on right now, so we have to. The old food court was became a hazard, risky building, so we have to tear it down. Unfortunately, but that was give opportunity to expand it, strengthen it. Hopefully, it will last for the next, at least my goal for the teams, the engineers is that minimum 50 years, you do not touch any more of the building. There's no more new building. Minimum 50 years and above. So I give an example. So I work in California, in the 80s, I was in Yosemite. I used to track Yosemite National Parks. And then I was there again last year. No new buildings, same structures, but with expansion of more sitting area because it was become more popular. Likewise, some of the results you see in the Alpines area. So same stuff. So that is the goal the standard we hope to set. Yeah? And then later, as soon as done, there was the place called Kuli Line. So the old quarters are dilapidated, so we want to create footprints to encourage the farmers to be able to sell their produce and so on, to help generate some, incomes and so on. So I'll talk more when I get a chance.
Thank you, Dr.
So just to add in one more last point to round out the entire discussion. So Dato' Cheok has covered the uniqueness of Penang Hill, the uniqueness of Penang Hill and the conservation efforts that Dato' Cheok has led, spearheaded to rehabilitate a lot of bungalows. But as mentioned, Penang Hill, because of its scale, its landmass size, it couldn't have developed the way it has, what is covered by Dr. Ui over here, about Dalat, about Simla, and so on. But to compare each hill station, we couldn't really get the full picture of it. We couldn't really accurately say which hill is a better one, which hill station is a better one, or which one is the best one, because each would has its own uniqueness. For example, if we look at Dalat, all right, Dalat, Vietnam, being a Southeast Asian history researcher who has been to Dalat, if we look below the layers, yes, there are some parts of it that are a bit commercialized. But as someone who really has that passion towards Vietnamese history, Dalat is a treasure trove. You've got the Emperor Bao Dai's palaces, not one but two, even hunting palaces over there, which really tells the entire the romantic history between Emperor Bao Dai and the last empress of Vietnam, Empress Nam Phuong and all. And there's another layer of the war history, the Vietnam War history, that is in Dalat as well, because it is the home to the elite South Vietnamese Armed Forces Staff College. So for people who really love that part of the history, Dalat, for example, is that would give you that layer of slice of history and even experience. For example, there's a Dalat Heritage, Dalat Palace Hotel, which is one of the most distinguished hotels, the grand hotels of Asia and so on. And apart from that, if we look at Simla, then you would look at the tea plantations history. Simla, even though, it looks a bit cluttered and so on, but what matters is the history that lies beneath those surfaces. Simla, Darjeeling, Nilgiri Hills would tell you that part of the British effort to break the Chinese monopoly on tea. So I think each hill has its own uniqueness, and right here in Penang Hill, it's all about a community spirit that that you can see people with the vegetable with vegetables and so on, the vendors, the food vendors and so on. So you can see that they still call Penang Hill as part of their home. But at the same time, I think the other hill stations around Asia, those built by the colonialists, especially the one I just mentioned in Dalat, founded by a very great French medicinal researcher, Alexandre Yersin, to cure early people who suffered from malaria, is another very great destination despite some layers of it being commercialized. So my point is, no hill is like the best version of it, but let's look at the uniqueness of each hill station, just like how we look at Penang Hill today. Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. And of course, as we've all heard today, clearly Penang Hill is not simply just a landscape, but it's really a living archive of choices made and paths avoided. So to wrap it all up today, I represent Penang Hill Corporation to thank our speakers today. Thank you, Eugene, Enzo, and Dr. Uy. And of course, to the incredible audience that you all are today. So thank you very much. We'll call it a day for today's talk already. Thank you.